Welcome to the Friday night meetup of the Conscious Church. My name is Dan Holland. I am the curate at the Conscious Church. We are located in Grand Rapids at 1438 South Division Avenue in the same location that the Conscious Resale Store is. We are having tonight part 2 of What is Science? 2 weeks ago, we did part 1, and we are in the process of getting that recorded and out there as a video so that others can watch it. Tonight, we will continue our dialogue about citizen science and look at such questions as, should we trust science? What does it mean to trust science? We'll also look at classification systems. Whose creation dominated early modern science? Why classification systems are useful? And we'll look at some of the main branches of science. And Debbie asked the question here, which is the oldest branch of science? So we got a lot to learn this evening, and I'd like to turn things over to Debbie Aaliyah. But first, I want to say welcome. And if you are watching this as a recorded video, we hope to have more videos that we've done in this series and in other series recorded and on our YouTube channel. The YouTube channel is The Conscious Church, so you can search under that. Or you can search by topic name, and hopefully you'll find us that way once we get them posted. Anyways, I turn things over to Debbie Aaliyah. Debbie.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, this was, I've been putting together about 20 slides in my PowerPoints for the last year or so since we started up again after COVID. And we had such a lively discussion that we only got through the first 10. So I'm gonna buzz through those first 10 since we have a couple people who did not make it the last time. And if you have any comments or want to, bring something up, or now that you're hearing it the second time, something sinks in, feel free to speak up. So last time we started by talking about how magic, religion, and science are 3 different ways that humanity has come up with in order to manipulate the cause-effect connection to our benefit. So first we tried with magic and religion. Those 2 really started together at the earliest time when humans were humans. And then much later, modern science was developed. So Aristotle said there is nothing without a cause. And we looked at Francis Bacon, who was the first one who really looked at the psychological aspects of humans and how that could be used in new ways to understand the world around us. And Francis Bacon came up with the 4 idols: the idols of the tribe, the idols of the cave, the marketplace, and the theater. So these had to do with false understandings that we have, starting from the fact that we're humans. Those are the idols of the tribe. So all humans have a certain way that our brains are structured. And then we have individual filters that keep us from seeing the real world, that are related to the particular cultural group we come from, the time we live in, the fact that we use language. Language is a very powerful tool, but it can limit us in the ways we think. So all of these different ways, seeing these different ways that filters get in the way of us seeing what's really there is thought by most modern scholars to have been the original progress that allowed science to develop. So we also talked about the fact that observing cause and consequence, or cause and effect, is something that we do, and we humans naturally link things together. We associate them in our mind when they happen at the same time, or when we see them together at the same place at the same time. So we came to conclude that because lightning was followed by thunder, that lightning might cause thunder. We came to see that it got light and then it got dark and the sun appeared to move across the sky. We noticed that when it rained, or it was necessary for there to be rain in order for plants to grow, and we noticed that unsupported objects may fall toward the earth. So those are all things, cause and effect, that we noticed in the world around us. And then we noticed that if we eat something, maybe our hunger diminishes. When we sit by the fire, we warm up. So we really got this idea of cause and effect. And so then we started thinking that maybe some of the events in the natural world are the result of the will of unseen beings. And so we got the idea we could manipulate the beings to do what we wanted them to do. So that's how I see that magic and religion are related to science, but science cleans up these causes and makes the connections either more clear how they are, or shows that they were never really causes in the first place, that we jumped to conclusions assuming they were causes just because they happened at the same time or were in the same place. So magic and religion can be the result, these paired things can be the result of random things that are associated only in the minds of one or two humans. So let's just, this is pretty much where we got last time, that magic is the attempt to manipulate unseen beings. Magic is the attempt for us to impose our will on the unseen beings. And, you know, that's why a lot of modern religions, particularly in the West, in the East, it's still acceptable to do yoga and become an ascetic in order to try to force Shiva to give you boons and powers. But in the West, the great prophet said, no, we shouldn't force God to do stuff that God may not want, that may not even be in our own interest. We should let God decide whether, you know, we're worthy of having these benefits. So religion is more, again, especially in the West, the big difference between magic and religion is that religion, the word religion means binding back. So we bind ourselves back in order to demonstrate to God that we are worthy, and we beseech God. We are allowed to beseech God, to pray to God, to ask for favors. And of course, religion is much more than that. And there are fellowships in the magical world also. So all of these systems of trying to influence things for our good also come with cultural accoutrements that the practitioners enjoy and are embedded in. And so all kinds of other ideas come along with the basic ideas of the magic or the religious path. And that's true of science also. You know, when in order to become a scientist, you develop a vocabulary, you develop a way of viewing the world that is associated with the path that you're walking. So that's pretty much what we talked about. It took us, what, an hour and a half to get through that, and now we got through it in 12 minutes. So obviously that was compressed. And so does anybody have any comments or anything before I forge ahead into the new material?
Very interesting, Debbie. Looking forward to the next slides.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, at the risk of going off on a tangent, I guess I was gonna
Then we'll
At
have to
least
have part 3, Peter.
at least inquire about this notion that we can influence God.
Okay, what would you like
Or
specifically?
do we really think that we can, I guess?
Well, isn't that the point of prayer? I mean, you're
No,
participating in an event at a secular
Yeah.
church.
well,
So not maybe everybody here doesn't think we can or doesn't necessarily even think that God exists, but
Yeah.
you know, there've got to be people who do think they can influence God.
Well, it seems like, there was this notion of influencing, I guess, in terms of magic and so on.
Well,
And is
the,
that influencing God, or is that influencing others, or persuading others that they have powers that, of course, others can't understand and whatnot?
let's hear what Addie has to say before I say anything else.
Yeah, my question is pretty much similar to Peter's question. For example, like in the secular people's mind, religion and magic is pretty much the same thing. So I was just wondering, because since they are listed separately on here, I'm just wondering about the differences between these two. The difference
So, right, I
between
mean,
magic and
so,
religion.
all right, so that's a good question again. So to me, I think the major difference is that a magician hones their own willpower in order to force the unseen beings to help them achieve what they want to achieve. The magician doesn't ask nicely. The magician doesn't say, if it is your will. The magician uses their will to the extent that they can to achieve what they want to achieve. Of course, there are people who use magic or who attempt to use magic for ill, and those who attempt to use magic for good. But the magician in general thinks they know what is good. So if you saw The Sorcerer's Apprentice, the movie, the Sorcerer's Apprentice uses these powerful magical spells because he's too lazy to go bring the water from the well. And so he uses this powerful spell, and water keeps coming from the well, buckets and buckets of water, until everything is drowning. And the master magician comes home and he's in big trouble. So with religion, there's more of an acknowledgement that maybe we don't know what's best for us. And we ask for things from the unseen beings, but we're asking, we're requesting. So that's the big difference I see. Sam, or Dan, who wants to talk?
Dinesh was up, had his hand up first.
Yeah. Right.
Okay, go ahead.
No worries. I just wanted to respond to what Peter was saying. Regarding asking favors from God. I think Debbie already knows this. There's a lot of mythological literature in the Eastern culture where people go on penances and request things from God. Like a weapon or a special magical power and things like that. And Indian mythology, at least, is replete with so many instances of that. And I think there are millions and millions of pages, related to all that. So I just wanted to bring that to your notice. And then I don't know whether that's true or not, but it's very interesting to read.
Well, when humans started making steel swords,
Mhm.
when they heat treated them, they couldn't be quenched in a bucket of water. They had to be quenched in the guts of a slave. So every sword that was made had to have that magical power of a sacrifice of a human.
Oh,
So it's much better to have science for that.
yes, I agree.
Bucket of water or some oil. Yeah.
So go ahead, Sam.
I guess the distinction that I'd like to make here is that I think what we're looking at is the origins and the speciation of magic, religion, and science. When you go back to the foundations, which I think is what Debbie is really focusing on here, the idea is that originally they were kind of all muddled together, and they began to develop speciation in that science was the pursuit of knowledge. Magic is, in the traditional sense, 5,000, 10,000 years ago, Bronze Age and earlier, would have been the idea that I can channel unseen forces to my will to affect the world. And that traditionally religions would have been focused on things like sacrifice or prayer or ways of earning the favor of the unseen. In modern, I don't know that that's necessarily the case anymore.
Thank you. Yes, that was
so-
very
so-
good. I'm very glad you said that.
Yeah, so Peter, I don't think the point here is to go and dismiss modern understanding of religion or Western theology as being equivalent to people waving their hands in the air and channeling ghosts or the powers of nature. That the original idea was when people didn't understand where lightning or thunder came from or what caused earthquakes, the ideas or the stories that were brought up all had the same sort of origins with the same intention of explanation. And
So
then
did that
and the difference of how they're applied.
address your issue? I wasn't quite sure exactly what you were asking.
Well, no, I think it adds to my understanding of the points you're trying to make here.
Okay,
I
thank you.
I
Yes,
think
Sam.
my question was often a little bit different way, in the sense of questioning, perhaps more at I'm trying to think of the word that I should be using here, but kind of questioning it in a more, perhaps in a more contemporary spiritual way, as opposed to the distinctions or the speciation as Sam is trying to make the point, and rightly so. Thank you.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there is overlap. I mean, there are rituals in modern religions that kind of resemble magic. And there are people who are practicing modern religions that really don't understand the difference between trying to force God's hand and trying to earn God's favor by doing the things that God thinks are ethical. I mean, that's a modern concept of religion too. The original religion, you prayed to the bad gods, you prayed to the evil gods, you prayed to the malicious gods, so they would leave you alone. And that was a big leap to say, okay, we're done praying to those mean gods. We're done sacrificing to those mean gods. We're gonna pray and sacrifice to the good gods. So,
But is it fair to say that maybe as we try to draw the distinction with science, these other systems, so to speak, are all rooted in manipulation of some sort?
yeah, I think so is science. right? Applied science, engineering. You know, we're manipulating natural forces to make them do what we want to do.
Well, okay.
Yeah.
I guess,
Like autism, like the vaccines cause autism. I was just wanting to make to give an example, like some people use science to give misinformation. For example, like
Oh.
vaccines cause autism.
okay. Yes, I was thinking in a
Well,
more
right, okay,
idealistic.
yeah,
I
so
was
there's
thinking in a
also manipulation for misinformation, but science, you know, even without that, science is about pure knowledge for some people, but for some people, it's about practical knowledge.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, heavens, I'm not a scientist. I'm an engineer.
Right,
So I take these scientific principles that are discovered and apply them. But when I said manipulation, I'm thinking more in terms
Yes.
of people,
Right.
not things.
yes, I think we understood that.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
Miss Esh, did you have something else you wanted to add? Or is your hand?
No, nothing more to it.
Okay.
No, okay. Let me look. I
There you
lower
go.
mine. I'm sorry.
All right, that way if you do want to say something else, it'll be fresh, so.
Sure.
Boy, so that's good to have a discussion like
love
that, and it shows how difficult it is and why I tried to convince the Union of Concerned Scientists to offer a ongoing class like this. And they're like, no, this isn't citizen science for them. For them, citizen science is convincing us to go out and count birds or something. Okay, come on. Okay, so so a lot of people, again, especially in the West, there was a big split between science and religion, and maybe we'll get to the causes of that, but Darwin was not the first one that caused a problem between religion and science, but certainly among the scientists that I know, it does seem that biologists tend to be the most consistently atheist. And so here's Darwin saying, I have never been an atheist in the sense of denying the existence of a God. I think that generally an agnostic would be the most correct description of my state of mind. So how could that be? Why is that the guy who created or developed one of the most controversial branches of science for the religious, the Christians in particular? And he says, I'm not an atheist. So what's going on here? So what we need to remember is that science is predominantly about how things happen and what is there. So facts are primary. The purpose of science is to discover facts and to propose or build theories and then work to prove or disprove them. And if they turn out not to be correct or accurate, then we try to come up with a new theory. Whereas religion is about explaining the whys that we can't figure out on our own. And obviously there were a lot more whys in years past. We have made progress at understanding the world. But the real purpose of religion is to preserve the group. And in order to preserve the group, the hierarchy of the group has to be preserved. Because if the hierarchy isn't preserved, then the values may drift, right? New people come in with new ideas. So facts are secondary to religion. And that's not a criticism of religion. That's just the way it is. They're two totally different things. Both are valuable to humanity. Some people don't give a hoot about religion. Some people don't give a hoot about science. But they're both a big part of how humanity has arrived at where we have. Addie?
Yes, I think that like with the Darwin's writing, it is not the problem. The problem was not about like evolution because like people can evolve and differentiate and stuff like that. I think the main your problem with his writing was that showing that Earth had existed longer than some certain thousand years. So that was the controversial part in his theory. It's not about evolution, it's about something else.
Well, okay, so yes, you are right. And I think I might have brought this up when we did the Darwin discussions a few months back, that Darwin was trained as a geologist. And but the bottom line is that why did the church have a problem with religion? So going back to Copernicus. So Copernicus said, no, the sun doesn't go around the earth goes around the sun. Well, does it ever say in the Bible that the earth goes around the sun or the sun goes around the earth? No, it doesn't. But that was what people thought. And so the church worked that cultural knowledge into their own teachings of everything else. And who were the educated people in the Middle Ages? The church, the priests, the scholastics, they were all associated with the church. So when these new ideas came up, it would have meant shaking the foundations of knowledge that the church had embraced. So that was the problem. Oh, there's Scott. Hi, Scott. Welcome, Scott. Sam or Dan, who wants to say something first, and then we'll welcome Scott.
Scott can go first. Go ahead.
Hi, Scott. You want to show us your smiling face for a second?
You don't have
So
to
we
if you
know
don't
it.
want to, but
It'll be nice, even if you want to turn it back off. If you have a camera, that'd be great. Yeah, he's okay. So his hand is up, but he's still on mute. So Sam, go ahead and talk, and we'll see if Scott gets himself off mute.
well, that's my hand is up, Debbie. I just wanted to
Okay.
don't often interject the theoretical framework of the conscious church into our discussions because I usually don't.
Okay, great. Yeah.
I don't see any need to, but the way that I look at it, you were talking about religion versus magic versus science and how they were really convoluted at the beginning because people didn't understand a lot of things, right? I look at the conscious church as like the next step in the evolution of religion because we fully embrace science and the scientific method. And I think part of that is just because we're a new religion, we can do that, right? I created, now we're recreating the theology of the church so that it embraces science. Because I've always had this thought that through the study of science, you can help figure out what is. And by understanding what is, you can understand what was. And eventually, I say eventually, that might be a long, long time, but eventually we can get a better understanding of how the creation of everything has to do with God. And I don't use the term big G God, I use the small g God. And so that people understand the difference there is when I was developing the conscious church, I looked at the existing religions that typically have an image of God as a supernatural being that is anthropomorphic, having human-like traits and that type of thing. And I always thought to myself that, if there is a God, I don't think it's anything like anybody's ever imagined. And then I came up with the concept of we are really all a part of God because at the creation point, God as God was became God that God is, which is partially us. And so to answer Peter's question, he was saying, can we influence God? And I think that part of the structural basis of the church, besides trying to use science to understand our world, is to know that, I say this quite often when we have different meetings and stuff, but we're each so uniquely beautiful because we're so unique. There's never going to be another one of us. And therefore we are influencing each other. And as I set forth within the theoretical framework of the church, that we are all a part of what was, therefore we're all a part of God. And so it's a different way of looking at religion. It's a different way of looking at God, but I think it's part of that evolution. And I think part of that evolution is not happening within existing religious structures because the structures were not designed to evolve where ours is. And therefore that allows us to talk about science, but it also allows us to talk about religion and how all those religions affect people, right? Because whether people believe in the big G God or the small G God, or they don't believe at all, or they're agnostic, what we embrace is that each and every person is a beautiful, unique individual that needs to be appreciated. And we do that by learning about each other, and we do that by learning about science. So I just wanted to mention that. I don't normally interject, but we're talking about science, but we also talked about religion. And I thought it was a good time just to say how the church is structured, because a lot of people don't know. Some people come to the Friday night meetups or other meetings, and we don't talk a lot about the theoretical framework. So I just put that out there, but thank you.
Thank you for doing that. And the only correction I have is that, of course, in the East, the religions absolutely do say that there is nothing but God, and so that we are all part of God.
Yeah.
So, but that was a good explanation. So, Scott, hi, you're off mute.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
We can.
Okay, looks like my connection is a little weak, so I apologize if I'm breaking up. And I'm coming a little late, so I may be going over something that you guys already discussed. But I did want to say that when discussing science or religion, I think it's important to break it into two important and critical parts. One is the implementation or the administration of science, and the other is the theoretical or the pure purpose of science. The pure purpose is stated here, but the administration of science happens through people and society, and that is essentially political. In the same way, spirituality and religion have a similar relationship. Spirituality is a pure essence of what is intended for religion, and religion is the administration through people and organizational structures. Therefore, some of these things that are stated here, for me, are not exactly correct. The spirituality piece,
We lost.
just like with scientists, they can accomplish the purpose of their job. Oh, okay. Am I back?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so I don't know which part was lost.
That's all right. I think we got the idea. And
spirituality
that's
part.
an excellent point. And I mean, to clarify even more between the purpose and the implementation and the interfaith dialogue movement, for example, they always make sure to tell people that when you're discussing something about a religion and comparing it to a different religion, you need to make sure that if you're discussing the ideals and the values of the religion, that you discuss the ideals and the values of both religions. So, and if you're discussing the practices, then you discuss the practices.
Right. And so that brings me to
this
the
is
point.
another level of deconvoluting. And yes, I certainly, the church, I think Mary and I are trying to get Dan, who started the church, to address these issues of spirituality and try to come up with a definition or a framework for spirituality within the church. So we're working on that. And I'm really happy that you brought that up. So
It's really important to understand too that in the study of science, sociologists who have studied how breakthroughs occur, they've observed, and I'm talking about Thomas Kuhn in particular, that breakthroughs happen all at once, that science is not linearly progressive. And the reason it happens all at once is because it's the breakdown of the social structure and agreement that something is or is not a fact, or that there is an essential clarification for anomalies that must be made. And so in the same way, I imagine that for individuals who, because I'm not particularly enlightened myself in this way, but I imagine that for someone who does become particularly enlightened, that those differentiations are.
we're losing you again. So I guess it's a good thing you didn't try to project your video. So, all right. Vishesh, do you have something else you want to say?
Yes. I just wanted to talk, just ask you, since this is my first meeting, I wanted to talk to you regarding the nomenclature of the group as such, it's the Consciousness Church. Since we're talking more about science and everything, why are you bringing, what do you call it, a religious name into the nomenclature? It could be Consciousness Temple or something like that. Instead of that, why
I'll
do we have
let
it as
Dan
church?
answer that.
Yes.
Dan is waiting for you, Vishesh, to create the conscious temple, and we're waiting for somebody to create the conscious mosque and the conscious synagogue and the conscious whatever.
So, yes, Debbie, as we oftentimes say, hit the nail on the head. I realized that because of my background and upbringing and my limited knowledge, that when I created the church, that one of the concepts I learned about was, cultural religiousness, such as a cultural Christian or a cultural Jew or a cultural, Hindu, and that a lot of the people within a certain faith are not necessarily believers in everything of the faith. Some of them don't believe in any of it, but they are still culturally aligned with that faith because of family and society and the area that they live. And so when I started this, I just wanted to get it going, but I left room for another group that might just be culturally Islamic, that they could have, a conscious mosque. And it would then allow us to come together under what I've started as the Real Religious Network International, so that all of that can be together and we can learn from each other and help each other to progress. So yes, definitely, that is something that we would like to see happen over time. Not to be divisive, but to be welcoming and to be to help learn and grow. So.
My humble point was, if we had a general name, what do you call that? Since I don't think we'll always be discussing religion, and I thought it's more of a science group, and I signed in because what is science? That was the topic, and part 2 or something.
We've gotten a little okay. One of the rules of critical thinking is that you understand what something is by comparing it to what it isn't. But anyway, okay, Cedar, you had a comment.
Oh, I was just saying thumbs up to what the guy was what the man was saying. The one, why don't I Daniel? To what Daniel was saying.
Okay.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, I was doing
We lost Scott, I guess.
thumbs up. I
Okay.
like it.
All right, thank you.
All right. So Yes, all of those things. Okay, back to science. Should we trust science? So, I mean, this has been going on now. The experts are urging us to trust science. I just hate that idea. I mean, what's the point of science? The whole point of science is you don't have to trust it. Science doesn't require faith. And, you know, somebody from a church I used to go to asked me to watch an anti-vaccine video and explain to them whether it was correct or not. And within 15 seconds of watching it, I knew it was a bunch of garbage and I wasn't going to watch it. But then I thought about it, you know, how I had been offering at that church, I had been offering for 10 years to teach a basic science class and nobody was ever interested. And now they, you know, because I was kind of the science person at that church. It was a small church. There was one other person who had a science degree in something. And, you know, the thing is, you can't just get from nowhere to fully understanding science. You have to have a basic understanding of how science works. So to me, these things on the news that people should just trust science, I'm not really a big fan. I'm trying to do my part by encouraging not only you, I mean, a lot of the people on tonight may know more science than I know, but the point is there aren't that many people that know how to talk about science to non-scientists. So, that's part of what I'm hoping this discussion will do. The fact that we're talking about it and learning some ideas about science, not, you know, over time in the other series, yes, we're going to talk about specific scientific ideas and knowledge. But the point is that I understood why they say trust science, because you can't teach somebody science in 5 minutes. You just can't. So, Dan, do you want to say something before Addie says something?
No, Addie can go. That's fine.
Thank you. Yeah, I totally agree with what Debbie mentioned about, you know, how science works, because a lot of the time people don't understand how science works, because like the whole idea behind how science works is that science is served to disprove something. It doesn't prove something. Science, according to Karl Popper, he came up with how, you know, people do science, the method is that science, the purpose of doing science is to not prove something. It's instead of to prove something, but a lot of people didn't understand how that works. For example, like science can't prove the supernatural, but that doesn't mean that the supernatural doesn't exist. So science is not about proving something. It's about disproving something.
Disproving, yeah. That's a good way to look at it. That's, yeah, I mean, even when we talked about the logic, you know, that you can have all the examples you want to prove something logically, and you can think it's true, but then the black swan comes along and disproves the fact that all swans are white. So you can never prove anything permanently forever, even with basic logic. And so science gives us working theories that are useful. That's the bottom line. Science should never be claiming ultimate truth. So the purpose, the reason I wanted to start this dialogue is for people who aren't scientists. I keep hoping more people who aren't scientists will come and become more curious about how science works and how science adds new knowledge. and to help people understand how science disentangles cause and effect. Because sometimes when you look at something happening, you can't really tell which is the cause and which is the effect. So that's, science allows us to create experiments to help sort that out. I have an interest in attempting to get this dialogue going because right now a very small number of people know enough about science to even be part of a national dialogue about where society should be using and promoting science, and what types of science perhaps we should not be doing now because our species is not morally mature. You know, should we really have developed the hydrogen bomb, the atomic bomb? Should we continue to develop poisonous chemicals? You know, should we do that? But because so few people have the basic knowledge to enter into those dialogues, it's a problem. So what I'm trying to do is encourage non-scientists to learn enough so that they can meaningfully participate in decisions about what science humans should pursue, and so that scientists can. I mean, a lot of scientists might think that science is inherently good. All science is inherently good. It's a search for truth. And we just should keep going and find as much about science as we can. The world is big, it's infinite in all directions. So just because we say, well, maybe we shouldn't pursue this particular branch of science doesn't mean that we're stopping knowledge. You know, maybe we need to learn more about how our minds work as individuals and in groups so that we can do things responsibly. I'm not here to make that decision. I'm here to help promote the idea that maybe we should be talking about this. So Karen's been very quiet. Do you have any thoughts you would be willing to share with us?
No, not at this time. I'm just taking it in.
Okay. So science is a broad area of knowledge, and I just figured I'd start at the beginning of modern science. There was a lot of classification to be done. So originally, life was divided into plants and animals, and fungi were included in the plant kingdom. And now we know that fungi in some ways are closer to animals than plants. Like the structure of the cells of fungi is the same thing that crabs and other arthropods use. It's chitin, it's not cellulose. And so that's why they had to give fungi their own kingdom. And microscopic life forms are currently classified into 3 additional kingdoms, 3 totally different groups that are as different from each other as animals are from plants. So some of the major ideas that I think of that come along with science is that, you know, a lot of people say, well, if you want to think clearly, you just need logic. No, that's not true. Because logic, garbage in, garbage out. You have to have factual knowledge in order to cross-check your logic and reason. And in order to gain factual knowledge, you have to cultivate your curiosity. You have to have that burning need to know. And if you believe that curiosity killed the cat, then that could be getting in the way, right? We have subconscious beliefs that keep us from following our curiosity. So we have to try to work to understand if we are carrying those beliefs in any way. We may call it something different, but if we believe that curiosity gets us into trouble, then that may put a damper on our curiosity. So having basic self-evident knowledge of the world and the human condition is the key to a sustainable shared reality. That's another reason why I wanted to get this science series going, is that, you know, one thing that I've really loved about being an engineer and belonging to an international engineering society is, you know, at our international conferences, we sit around the table and have dinner, and there might be people from 10 different countries at the table, totally different cultures. And yet the facts of our physical world are the same for all of us. And so that knowing those facts, and especially, well, for me, I'm kind of in a little specialty field. I'm a materials person. So there aren't that many people who know what I know. So it's kind of, it's a fellowship. When I meet somebody, you know, I go to India, I go halfway around the world, and I have instant friends. And, you know, that would be true of any type of expertise. You know, if you're an artist, you can go halfway around the world and you'll probably find some people who like your art and want to know how you came up with your art and what you're trying to do with your art. I know people who play bridge can go anywhere in this country anyway and find a bridge club and meet instant new friends. So science, in a way, acts as a social bridge. Glue. Good word. Yeah. That is really global, for sure. And we have to believe that it's universal, going beyond Earth, that if we ever met some other type of being, that some portion of the physical laws that we've discovered would find some resonance with them. That's kind of why I wanted to do this, and what I hope you will find valuable in putting your 2 cents in and listening to it, and maybe trying using some of the ideas with other groups you're in or your other friends, and seeing what they think about these ideas. I talk here about having basic self-evident knowledge of the world is key to a sustainable shared reality. So we have science and what's not necessarily self-evident. Like we've talked before about the force of gravity is self-evident. You know, kids in high chairs learn about the force of gravity by dropping their toys to learn about cause and effect, that their parents will come pick up their toys and give them back to them, as well as the cause and effect of opening their fingers and the thing falling. So that part of gravity is self-evident, but there are more complex parts of gravity that are not self-evident, like that the force, the equation with which 2 bodies attract each other is dependent on their mass and their distance and the exact way that is dependent. That is not self-evident. That has required science, the scientific approach, to elucidate and make it so that even people who are not as smart as Isaac Newton, people like me, can punch some numbers into an equation and calculate some effects.
You are very smart, David.
I never would have figured. I'm not as smart as Isaac Newton.
You're humble.
Everybody on here, raise your hand if you think you're as smart as Isaac Newton. Okay,
I just say
Sam
yes, no. I
is.
just say yes, no.
That's good.
You do have to remember that it's all relative against the lack of knowledge versus the ability he had against what was not known and known. You have high school students doing forms of calculus that he did not.
That's true.
Yes.
That's true. We know all kinds of things. We know how to use a smartphone. The guy who ran the electron microscope for me early in my career before I had my own was a devout Christian. And I said, well, Jesus knows everything. And you know, blah, blah, blah. And I don't know why he wanted to argue with me, but he did want to argue with me about that. And he said, well, no, there are things Jesus doesn't know. And I said, well, what doesn't Jesus know? And he said, well, if he came and sat down in front of this skinny electron microscope, I'd probably have to teach him how to operate. And I'm thinking like, no, if he's really Jesus, he should be able to tune in with you and not have to have you show him. He should be able to just use your knowledge, merge his consciousness with you and use your knowledge. But anyway, we all have our filters and our sensory filters, our analytical filters. And so we need to learn to work through those to the degree that we can so that we are open to seeing a bigger picture of how the world truly is. So we already talked about that and blah, blah, blah. Okay, so classification was a big part of early science, and originally it was based on observation. Now we have additional tools. Classifications are still a key area of research in many fields. I'm an amateur mushroom hunter, and I get Fungi magazine, and there are always articles in there by professional PhD mycologists or ones who are working to get their PhDs, and they argue back and forth about, well, is this two different species or is this one species, and is the species that looks exactly the same but it's in Finland, is it the same species that's in Wisconsin, or is it two different species? So anyway, that is still an active area of science, is figuring out what's related to what.
Yeah, I jump in with that, Debbie.
Sure.
I just saw a talk here in Clackamas, Oregon, where they were talking about the particular plant expressed a different set of genes when it grew next to another plant, and it looked like a different species near one plant and versus when it was on its own. And so there's a lot of knowledge that still is not understood.
Right, and there were all the butterflies, the butterflies in South America that the early scientists found. There butterflies that disguise themselves as other butterflies.
Wow.
That, I mean, some of the time it's because those other butterflies taste bad. So they're hoping that the predators that don't eat the yucky butterflies will also not eat them. But then how do their mates recognize them? So yeah, classification is not necessarily as easy as we might think it is. And the benefits of the major benefit of classification is that it expands the utility of facts by letting them apply to multiple types of things. So, for example, fruit trees. Are there things that are true of all fruit that grows on trees? All fruit that grows on. So first you have to kind of go through your mind and start thinking of different kinds of fruits that grow on trees. I mean, apricots and peaches and plums all have pits, and apples and pears and oranges don't. So is there anything that we could use if we're an expert in apricots to tell us something about a pear? Is there something that if we know about apricots, we would also know about an orange. What is a fruit? Addie just put an interesting note in the chat. Humans should have our own kingdom separate from the animals. Yeah, well, that's an interesting thing to contemplate. So can anybody think of, I mean, how does the fact that we know something about one type of fruit that grows on a tree, how would that help us to understand other things about a different type of fruit tree?
My understanding is that a fruit is defined to be a packet of seeds, seed or seeds.
Okay.
So that causes some problem because in our common language that we use, we don't think of some things as fruits, such as maybe green beans. We think of them as a vegetable. But when you study them and you classify them, they are more of a fruit.
Right.
But then you have fruits that are annuals and fruits that are perennials.
Right. So this particular question we're asking about trees. So which does a tree fit into? Is it an annual or a perennial?
Perennial.
Perennial. Okay. So
that's about all I know, Debbie.
that's all you know. All right. So let's see what Scott has to add.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
and most of the things I'm observing that come across my mind or I see other people commenting on we're thinking in terms of its utility to us as humans.
Yeah.
And so that's just a massive bit of psychological inertia in the first place that I'm observing in myself.
Yeah.
But along that vein, you can graft branches from one type of tree if it's similar enough to another. You can bud, meaning you take the buds and you can bud them onto another branch. And so those are some things that are like within an apple tree, you can take and bud and graft to other apples. And there may be some relationships between apricots and pears that have other relationships that I'm not aware of, but it's something that occurred to me.
So, well, we can go back and ask a little bit more about what is a fruit, which Dan asked. So a fruit is something that has seeds, but how about going back even further? A fruit is the offspring, right? A fruit is like a baby. A fruit is the produce of the sexual relationship of the tree, either with itself, so pollen from the same flower or from other flowers from the same tree. Some trees are self-fruitful and other trees require pollen. So the female in the part of the flower requires pollen, the male part, from a different variety of tree. So apples usually don't make very many fruits if they don't get pollen from a different variety of apple. So by stepping back and asking, well, what is a fruit, as Scott pointed out, beyond, yes, that's right. Natural bananas have seeds. So even before GMO bananas were made to have very small seeds. We have nominally seedless oranges that might have just a few seeds. So that's our manipulation for our purposes. But the fact is that a fruit by itself is something that carries seeds, that it is the offspring, the next generation for the tree. And so knowing that, especially if we look at the tree and all year round, we'll see that all of these fruits that grow on trees started as a flower. Started as a flower that had both female and male parts. And so we can, when we step back to see the larger picture of what a fruit is, rather than just something that we grow to eat because we like the flavor, and that we try to minimize those nasty seeds, that was why Mother Nature was making the fruit in the first place, then we can learn more about our world and the whole idea. You know, who here remembers how they felt about learning that trees reproduce sexually? If you ever did learn that before right now, right? Trees, most trees reproduce sexually. All trees, flowers, garden flowers too. Not just animals are sexual beings. Mushrooms, by the way, a lot of mushrooms, you need 3 different it's not necessarily a male and a female, but you need 3 different individuals to create the next generation. So, okay, so that's why understanding classification is good, because it makes the knowledge that we have more useful. We see that it can apply to a broader range of entities than whatever it was we learned it about.
So Debbie,
Yes.
to tie this into our critical thinking series, doesn't classification really, isn't it really based on comparing and contrasting? I mean, that's the essence of it, right? And
Exactly.
without having that first one that you define, such as maybe all you have in your area is apples, right? So you study the tree, you study the apples, you study, you know, how they mature, how they rot, what's inside of them, what's on the outside of them, the lifespan of the trees, you know, what kind of nutrients do they need, what kind of soils do they need, how much sun do they need? All of that stuff, you classify it, and then you go to another part of the country and you find, oh, whoa, this is a different fruit. Never seen this before, right? It gives you that framework to start that comparing and contrasting.
Exactly. You have asked all those questions, which whatever tree you're looking at, it's going to have those similar issues. It's going to need some amount of sun, some amount of fertilizer, some amount of this nutrient, that nutrient. It's if it's a tree, it's a sexual being. It's going to need to have pollen get to the pistil, or it's not going to make a fruit.
But even beyond that, what types of insects are attracted to it? How does it interplay within the ecosystem that's there?
And we're learning more and more that trees would not be able to grow without fungi. The fungi are what coat the roots of most trees and allow them to absorb nutrients in the first place. So yes, absolutely. Once you've studied one thing, then even if you're not aware of it, you have gone a long way toward creating a structure of understanding many other things.
So your classification system has to be flexible, right? For example, I'm thinking about how we've come to understand that a mushroom is really one of the largest living creatures or living organisms, right? Because of genetic
They
testing.
found that huge mushroom. Yeah.
Yeah. So, anyways, thank you.
Yeah, we needed DNA to prove that, right? That they dug up tissue samples from a huge area and realized it was all the same individual. So, so yeah, classification. Linnaeus, who we also talked about, Linnaeus, he is the one who developed the modern system of classifying life forms. He didn't originally necessarily classify minerals, but of course we have this same types of comparing and contrasting with minerals as we do with life forms. And in fact, some minerals are the result of the action of life forms. So the waste products of some bacteria, for example, become certain types of minerals or change the types of minerals that would have otherwise been present. So even this idea of life and not life being totally separate, that's been shown by science to be incorrect. So, but here's an example of Linnaeus's system where we take at the top 7 different animals, from a brown bear, a black bear, a giant panda, a red fox, a Abert squirrel, a coral snake, and a sea star. So the first 5 on the left all have fur. Those are all mammals. And the snake and the sea star are not. But the first 6 all have vertebrae. They all have a spine of some sort. So that's chordata. The sea star doesn't have a vertebrae. It has an exoskeleton of some sort. Now, if we're talking about fur, the snake doesn't have it. So snake goes, and we're left with mammals. But there are different kinds of mammals. There are mammals that eat other mammals or other animals, and there are mammals that are vegetarian. So the squirrel doesn't eat other animals. So if we're just looking at the animals that eat other animals, the squirrel goes. We're left with 4. Now, all those things on the left kind of look like bears. So they're Ursidae. The fox doesn't look like a bear. The fox looks more like a dog. So the fox goes. The panda isn't really exactly like a bear. It's kind of an odd thing. And I don't know, I thought pandas only ate bamboo. So why is it in with the carnivores? See, you know, every time you actually look at the details of a classification system, this is what you run into, in my opinion. Every time I have looked at the details of classification, there's always arbitrary stuff, right? Am I wrong? Let's vote. Who says pandas only eat bamboo? Do they eat? I mean, they're always talking about they only, maybe they eat bugs too. I don't know. But this just is suspicious to me. The panda is here. I think this is a problem.
Debbie, you got it off the internet. It's got to be right.
Classification, very important aspect of science. Here are the new kingdoms. There might be another one now, but anyway, I got this off the internet too. I'm giving you my source. So of the 6 kingdoms, animal, plant, fungi, these are all microscopic things. Protists, eubacteria, archaebacteria. So these are prokaryotes. They have a different type of nuclear structure than the eukaryotes. And when you hear that we share 99% of our DNA with a banana, we're all eukaryotes. So, Mary, did you have a question or comment, or is your hand still up voting that pandas eat bamboo?
My hand is still up voting.
All right. So, so these are the basic ways of breaking up living things into the different kingdoms. So this was not Linnaeus. He only had, oh, I see, maybe he did have minerals. And minerals aren't here because they're not considered alive. But there was a Scientific American issue where the cover story was that a lot of rocks are actually waste products from life processes. So I think this is gonna have to be redone. All right, well, we have 10 minutes left, so I thought I would just briefly introduce types of science or branches of science. One is geology. And geology is not only the study of the earth, but now because we compare and contrast, geologists also can work on understanding the structure and materials in Mars and Mercury or any other stony planet. Geologists study the processes that act on the planets and that cause them to change. Earth started out as a bunch of tiny little things that collided together, generated a lot of heat, melted. It took a long time for Earth to cool, blah, blah. So geologists are the ones who figure out all that stuff, how Earth's material structures, processes, and organisms have changed over time. So landslides, earthquakes, floods, volcanoes. Geologists study Earth's materials such as oil, coal, gas, metals, and rocks. And geologists study Earth history. So climate change over millions of years is studied by geologists. And Lyell's book is the one that Charles Darwin took with him when he went on the voyage of the Beagle. But I don't think Lyell is as famous as Darwin. And I tried to look up some famous geologists, and they just don't seem to me that they're as famous as the biologists. But anyway, this is a way of depicting the history of the Earth, and you can look this up yourself. Cosmology. You know, how do you really understand the Earth if you don't understand the place of the Earth in the universe? So all these sciences are linked together. And for the teaser, I'm trying to remember which book I'm reading now or what article I read now. That's really bad, but this person claimed that astronomy was the oldest science. Now, it wasn't a modern science in the sense that Francis Bacon and the truly modern scientists were, but the early astronomers, like the ones who built Stonehenge, who calculated where the rocks would be so that they would know where to place the rocks so that the sun would come up between two particular rocks on the solstices. They were taking measurements, and they were doing this thousands of years ago. So that's one answer, is that astronomy was the first science. People looking at the planets, measuring the motions of the planets, observing the planets, looking at the stars and how the stars moved with the seasons. And even there's some pre-modern scientists who pandas have the digestive system of a carnivore, but dependent on bamboo. And Addie notes they also created the calendar. Yes, that was, I don't remember what I was going to say, but that is why astronomers wanted to be so scientific, is because they needed a calendar so that they could tell when they had to plant their crops. So as soon as humans became dependent on agriculture, they needed a calendar. The ancient Egyptians got so good with their calendars that they were able to predict eclipses. And then that allowed them, so it was their science that allowed them to take their religion to the next step, because now the priests could claim that they knew the gods were going to be angry because the people weren't bringing as many gifts as they should, and that the sun was going to be extinguished. So they were able to predict the eclipses until they couldn't, because their data became outdated. And that is one thing that some people think led to the downfall of the Egyptian kingdoms. So yes, other people, Addie notes, the Mayans also had a calendar. Addie, do you know if they were also able to predict eclipses?
I'm not sure about that. I just know that they predicted a date that would like the end of the world, but the world didn't end. It was supposed to end in 2012 or something like that.
Right, 2012, I think. Yeah. Scott?
It was the purview of a lot of religions to,
Yeah.
And the distinction between an astronomer and an astrologer is not so strong in those days. The Chinese had
Right.
astronomer astrologers, the
Yes.
ancient Hindus. In fact, in some cases,
The
there
Hindu
are some
astronomers were really smart.
very clever. Some of their calculations measure closely against modern physicists.
Yeah, I wish I could remember what the heck I was reading. I guess I read too much stuff, but that's exactly the point that they made, that and until modern time, Isaac Newton believed in astrology. You know, they had this this idea, as above, so below, that the structure of the heavens was reflected in human society. And that was the basis for astrology. That's it. Okay, slide 23 of 23. And anybody else have any thoughts they want to share?
So Debbie, I picked up something tonight that I had never realized before. And that was that when I look up in the night sky and I see a light, I think of that as one star. And so now you're talking about it being, I saw in the slide there, of it being a whole galaxy with hundreds of billions of stars in that one little spot. That's like blowing me away. I'm like having a conversation here with Sam about this. It's like, it's so far beyond my comprehension. It was beyond my comprehension before, right? And it's amazing.
And Peter's
So-
been following the Webb telescope closely, and that's going to give us even more crazy stuff that's beyond our comprehension.
Yes.
And
Scott?
Yeah, and then additionally, just to blow the mind blowing, is that the light is ancient light. It is literally millions and millions of light years away, and what we're seeing may not be
Some of
actual
it.
reality.
Right, when we
Some
look
other
out at
place.
the sky, we're seeing stuff that is not all happening at the same time. When
Right.
we look out at the sky, we're seeing some light that left its star relatively recently, and some that left its star in the unimaginable past. And we see it all at the same time. And it's science that's revealed to us that no, that light is coming from vastly different times.
Yeah, this notion of of a telescope being a time machine, essentially.
Wow.
Yes,
Oh, yeah, I
just to
have
add
the-
to,
Go ahead, Musesh.
I mean, just to add to what Deb and Scott said, the fact that you're seeing some stars and it's coming to you after billions of years, the star itself may not be there. So Dan might be seeing something which is not there. No, and this I read in Stephen Hawking's book, Brief History of Time.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Well, so it's no longer in its present state as we would think.
Yes,
of it.
No,
exactly,
no longer in
exactly.
the state we're seeing it in.
Right.
So
It
we
is
are seeing
in
the
its-
ghost. Yeah. We are seeing
It-
something which is not there. It's a mirage or an illusion or something like that.
And then to add more complexity to this, from a quantum mechanics point of view or from quantum state point of view, it actually could be happening all at once. We just
Right.
can't perceive the illusion, or we see the
Exactly.
illusion and not the reality.
Right.
Exactly.
So we'll see if Dan's gonna throw me out of the conscious church for bringing up my favorite line from a Christian hymn, which is from
Don't say it, Debbie.
Amazing,
Don't say it. Don't say it. What are you gonna say?
Amazing Grace.
Yes.
When we've been here 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. So to me, that is exactly this idea that time is not linear in the way we think it is. And science has definitively proved that fact. That
Very troublesome and lovely.
The world is non-linear.
Yes.
so
Well, Debbie, can you give us an idea of what we have coming up as far as some other citizen science and some of the other critical thinking and that kind of stuff?
right. So that's a good question. Our next meeting in 2 weeks is just an open discussion. If you had the chance to give everybody else in the world or a particular group, subcategory of humans on the face of the earth some advice, what would it be and why? And you're welcome to make up a couple of slides or pictures to share with us. So I think we're going to be the fountain of advice here. And
Debbie, can you type that question out
Yeah.
on the chat box?
I will try. It's up on the meetup group already in 2 weeks.
Okay,
so,
great. Okay, sure.
So,
No,
and then the next citizen science, I don't know, are there any requests? Right. I was going to, I've been reading this book, The Stickler's Guide to Science in the Age of Misinformation. So this is a really interesting book, and I might pick something from this. I'm not sure if anybody has any suggestions. They're welcome to. And the critical thinking, we're following David Levy's book, Tools of Critical Thinking. And if anybody has any ideas for what they'd like, feel free to say it. Sam, I'll let you say it in a minute. And also, there is a message board associated with the meetup group, so feel free to post there and I will take a look. All right, Sam, what's your idea?
We've kind of dabbled in or touched on the ways that magic and science and religion serve similar functions and then speciated. I'm curious if you've done any work on proto-science or pseudoscience, like looking at things like alchemy or things that have been that were widely accepted as being factual or knowledge-based and have since been debunked or they've fallen out of popular favor.
Well, alchemy, yeah, I've read several books on alchemy, and of course, as a metallurgist, I do consider myself an alchemist. We are in Russia. Metallurgists are proud to claim themselves as the modern descendants of the alchemists. I mean, that's kind of an odd thing for an American metallurgist to say, but apparently the Russian metallurgists all that's how they think of themselves. So what's alchemy about? Transformation. What does everybody think? Does that sound like an interesting topic?
Oh yeah.
Alchemy. Karen, what do you think?
Absolutely. Yes,
Karen
ma'am.
might like that. Okay, good. All right, I'll see what Mary, what do you think?
Yes, I would be interested as well.
All right, that one's going to be hard. See, that's why I suggested to Dan and Mary that we put in these more lighthearted discussion things, because I love doing this. I'm so grateful to have a group of intelligent people to discuss these things, but I definitely learn how ignorant I am every time I put one of these together. So, Scott?
Yes, when it comes to alchemy, there may be forms of knowledge that maybe were more incredible than credible. And when we abandon those systems, sometimes you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. In some cases, the caloric theory of heat is highly predictive still, and a superior theory for some chemical reactions than thermodynamics. And so it's not always that when we abandon some theory that we have improved. Sometimes there is a loss. And so perhaps taking that viewpoint that when we abandon a theory, I mean, even, more like applied knowledge, moving from the drafting table to CAD, there's skill sets that are lost and bodies of knowledge that are lost for an engineer and others that are gained. And so that might be a good angle to view things from also, as what is gained and what's lost in the abandonment of knowledge.
Well, maybe that leads kind of into my comment that if we're talking citizen science, maybe there's an immigrant science or refugee science.
Oh.
So maybe these how can I say, systems that have been discarded could be considered refugee science.
Pariah science.
So
Like the use of the slide rule.
I think that's a fabulous example.
I love that. I love that you said that. That's just excellent. I've been reading about conjure tradition of slaves that came over, and after the Middle Passage and after it got on this continent. And the book is about religion, conjure tradition, and the way that the author calls it black magic, but she has like a double meaning for it. But I've been thinking about what I'm writing about is clues to parapsychology and conjure tradition, and whether and trying to see how scientifically how parapsychology is mirroring what these people brought to this continent with them, and how the sort of syncretic value of them mixing their continental and their indigenous religious practices with Christianity for survival, and so I'm thinking, wait a second, the way they did their conjure tradition looks a lot like science, and in many ways, and I'm going, oh my gosh, I feel like this is incredible somehow.
Yeah, well, I really love what you're saying about that regarding the indigenous knowledges, because there was a seafaring culture, the Polynesians and their seafaring culture, they're very close to the equator. And a lot of the practices they developed were based on observation of the moon, how the current felt in their hand, and the ability to detect the current with their fingertips. And so many different types of knowledge was very physical.
Yeah.
And it did require being able to learn it. And then some people were able to build on that in a scientific way to be able to navigate more precisely. So
Well,
it's,
yeah, because they had because the technology of the cultures had to continue to be developed. If it failed, right? If there's some external or environmental influence that caused it to fail, then it had to be tested again. But it was tested experientially, right? It wasn't tested in a lab. So you have a certain kind of way that, you know, how do the elements of science apply to indigenous structures of thought and of building science, building technology and culture and medicine and what have you. So I just love this. I like that, Scott. I love that example a lot.
Well,
Thank
sounds
you.
like epistemology. How do you know what you know?
Right. Yeah. How do you know what you know?
Yeah. Well, excellent. We are about 10 minutes over our scheduled end time tonight, actually more than that. Just want to give a wrap up and say thank you to everybody for joining tonight. I appreciate one of the things that I've mentioned lately to different people that are at work and my family and whatnot is that I'm really learning that even people significantly younger than I am, I'm able to learn stuff from, and they just really blow me away. It's amazing. So I can see that in a lot of you. I hope that you stick around, that because you've got so much to offer that I can learn from. But thank you for being here tonight. And if you happen to be in the Grand Rapids area, we do have dinner after our meetings. And thank you to Mary for putting those together. But yeah, I know, Cedar, you're in a few states away. It'd be a little difficult for you to get here.
I'll be there in an hour and a half. No, just kidding.
We'll still be drinking wine. It'll be fine.
Yeah. But yeah, so thank you. And typically every other Friday. But yeah, look us up. I appreciate you being here with us. So good to meet you. I appreciate it. So
And thanks, Vishesh, for sticking around, even though it wasn't exactly what you thought. So yeah, we're an eclectic group, and you never know where the conversation's gonna go.
I mean, great, great time for me, and I wish we have teleportation so that I can join the dinner after the meeting.
yeah.
So Star
All
Trek,
right.
Star Trek, or whatever you.
Have a great
Thanks to
weekend,
everybody.
everyone.
Thank you.
Happy weekend.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Bye bye.
Good morning.
Bye,
Good
Bye.
night.
Karen. Bye,
Bye.
Eddie.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Scott.